Listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, everybody. This is Michelle Young. I'm the Executive Director of the University Council for Educational Administration, and we're here with you today on the UCEA webinar series on educational leadership. Our goals for this particular webinar today are to answer all the questions that you might have about the Exemplary Educational Leadership Preparation Program Award and to encourage you all to submit a nomination of your program. We also hope to provide some clarity with regard to the application process. Because we want to know what your questions are as soon as possible. We would love it if you would consider submitting your question either through the chat box or through the question section of the webinar panel. And we will get back to you as quickly as we can and have either one of our panelists talk to you either afterwards if we don't have time during the webinar, or if we can work a answer to your question into the webinar, we'll try to do that as well. We're also hoping to explain how the application process can be a valuable tool for your own work within your program evaluation and if you're engaged in redesign. I'm hoping that most of you are here today because you are pretty proud of your preparation program and or you're looking to find out more about some of the exemplar programs. Over the last 10 years, research has revealed quite a bit about the important relationship between preparation and leadership outcomes. And the programs that we have recognized so far with the Exemplary Educational Leadership Preparation Program Award are real role models in providing high quality education leadership preparation. We had a couple of goals in putting together this award, which is underwritten by support from the Wallace Foundation. And one of the biggest purposes was to celebrate these exemplary programs, to draw attention to the fact that there are some amazing programs that are housed within universities that are doing some really exceptional things. And then the second purpose was to provide role models, exemplars, if you will, for other programs that are looking for innovative ways to change their programs and high impact strategies for preparation and program improvement. Now, joining us today are two exceptional faculty members who have some strong expertise in the area of educational leadership preparation and program improvement. First, we have Dr. Shelby Cosner, who is the Academic Program Director for the University of Illinois at Chicago's Doctorate in Urban Educational Leadership. The UIC program won the EELPP award in 2013, and then Shelby served as a reviewer in subsequent competition to select the next set of winners. We also have joining us today Dr. Ann O'Doherty. And Dr. O'Doherty is a faculty member at the University of Washington. And she has worked closely with UCEA in the development of the award itself and has also served as a reviewer. And on behalf of UCEA, I wanted to extend a very warm welcome to both Ann and Shelby and thank them for joining us today. So welcome. Now, as I mentioned, one of the main goals for today's webinar is to address your questions. And so once again, I see a couple of people have posted comments within the question area, which is fantastic. So I continue to encourage you to do that throughout the webinar and or to put something in the chat box. And we probably will not, in fact, we will not be turning off the mute simply because in past webinars we found that it's somewhat difficult to ensure that webinar participants' audio is working effectively. So we would like to be able to pose your questions for you. So if you could post them and let us do that, we would appreciate it. So without further ado, we would like to first of all tell you what the EELP award is. So as I mentioned before, UCEA established the EELP award several years ago. We've had the competition going for 3 years now. And essentially what we're hoping to do is be able to identify either 1 or 2 programs per year that demonstrate elements of effectiveness across a spectrum of categories. And we're going to talk to you a little bit about what those categories are today. And we also really want to encourage those of you who are attending today and those who have submitted nominations in the past but have not been yet recognized to submit your programs. UCEA has developed 11 program and institutional quality criteria, and we'll go into greater detail about these during our webinar today. But essentially, these are the criteria that are used to review institutions that are submitting applications for UCEA membership. And we have a set of rubrics, and these are available online on the UCEA website. If you go under opportunities and you're looking at the awards page and you look specifically at the Exemplary Educational Leadership Preparation Program Award, you'll see that there is a link on that page to the UCEA award criteria, which is also the program and institutional quality criteria. Each one of these areas is here for a very specific reason. In terms of use of best practices, we're looking for evidence that the programs are engaging in the use of research and information that's being shared throughout the community around effective practices for preparing educational leaders. When we're looking at things like full-time faculty members, we're also looking at the quality of preparation that they're providing, their areas of expertise, their engagement, and using research within their classroom and so forth and so on. In terms of collaboration with partners and advisory boards, we're wanting to know what exactly you're doing within those different areas. And as I said, the participants on our webinar to give you a little bit more insight into each one of these. So UCEA is very, very happy to have been able to have awarded the EELP award to 4 outstanding programs in the past. Last year, no award was given. That's not because the nominations that were submitted were not high quality programs. It was primarily because while there had many elements of high quality and some exemplary practices, the overarching review of each one of those elements that we just had on the last slide did not warrant a identification as a overall exemplary program. And through the process, however, the reviewers provided some very significant feedback for each one of the programs that were nominated, to let them know the different specific areas in which there were some concerns, and in hopes that the programs could use that feedback to make adjustments and or to provide more of a rationale for why it was that they did something the way that they did it, and so forth and so on. But in the 2014 school year, we identified the University of Denver Ritchie Program for School Leaders as well as the North Carolina State University Northeast Leadership Academy. Two very different programs. The University of Denver is in an urban area. The North Carolina State University serves a rural population. Two different approaches to preparation. And I point that out just because we're not looking for a one-size-fits-all, off-the-shelf idea of high-quality preparation. Rather, we know that high-quality preparation has to be contextualized and has to meet the needs of the populations that you're serving and you're preparing leaders for. And these two programs are exceptional examples of that, as are the 2013 winners. The University of Illinois Chicago is a very different program from the University of Texas San Antonio. And the primary reason for that is the different partnerships that they're working with and the populations that they're serving. So we want to tell you, begin really with the webinar by talking about some of the benefits of applying. So Shelby, would you like to tell us a little bit about this from the UIC perspective?
I will. So you see a few benefits up on the screen, but I want to get under the hood on a few of those in detail. When you actually review the application process on the UCEA website, you will see that following your submission of intent to apply, the very first step of the process is conducting a program self-assessment, and you're using the UCEA's institutional and program quality criteria rubric. Those criteria were on one of the previous slides. So from our perspective, this process will help your program to consider and take stock of program strengths and next edges of growth for the program. The process of submission can also help you to codify some of the practices that you may not have codified. In our program, there were many things that we were doing, but we realized when we started to work on application that some of the things that we were doing hadn't been well documented. And so the process of application encourages you to codify or really document the things that you're doing. That can become useful in many ways, not just for your application for UCEA, but when you're submitting for future grants or as you're trying to create student recruitment materials, you'll suddenly find that you've got materials to draw on that you may not have had in the previous years. Following the submission, if you connect back to a comment that Michelle made earlier, reviewers will provide feedback. The feedback really is intended to help you as a program think about your program against the criteria in the program quality criteria rubric. And with that in mind, it will really help you to think about strengths and next edges of growth and areas that you can target for future and ongoing improvement work. Now, lastly, and this I think is also very important to note, that when you win an award, of course, it's going to bring visibility to your program. What I have found interesting, thinking about it from a visibility standpoint, is that there are a couple of things that are automatically built in to create visibility. And for example, if you are a winner of the award, you have the ability to write an article that's featured in JRLE that really allows you to describe your program. And of course, that's a really important way to make your program visible to many. What was not maybe anticipated, but has been in something that's happened as a result of this award. If you were to look at the U.S. News and World Report findings that came out here just within the last several weeks, you'll see that I believe 3 of the 4 programs that have been identified through the Exemplary Program Award from UCEA are listed in the top 20 of U.S. News and World Report. And I believe these would have been programs, ours included, that wouldn't have made the top 20 in previous years. And so from a visibility standpoint, we believe that the UCEA award was a factor in our being able to push into that top 20 award for U.S. News and World Report.
Thanks, Shelby. We wanted to also tell you a little bit more specifically about how these applications are judged. I'm sure some of you who are listening are, wondering, okay, so, we put together these different applications, and what exactly are the reviewers looking for? I think we probably would like to have Shelby start once again, and then Anne, if you could then also chime in on the application judgment part.
Great, thanks, Michelle. So as will be detailed by Michelle in just a few minutes, the application has 5 elements. And you're going to see those elements listed when you look on the UCEA website. The very first element that you're submitting is an overall description of the program. And you have 25 pages to provide that description. I guess the most important thing that I convey is that that first 25 pages is, from my perspective, the most important part of what you're submitting. And that's the place where you need to be able to very quickly demonstrate evidence of the institutional and program criteria that were identified on the previous slide. So in looking at those criteria, there are 11 things, and in those first 25 pages, your program's ability to talk in a very targeted manner about those 11 criteria is very important. So as you think about that, I would ask you to really write in a purposeful way those first 25 pages. As you review the institutional and program criteria rubric, consider the program areas that you've received improvement attention or where you've worked over the last 3 to 5 years. So as you think about those criteria, I'm believing that your program has really worked in the last 3 to 5 years in several or more of those areas. And if on the front end, you can think very clearly about the areas that have received really deep program improvement work and how you can best showcase the development and the work would be to your advantage. Next, when you look at the program criteria, the program quality criteria rubric, you're going to see that in addition to the 11 criteria, they're really operationalized through a rubric where each one of the criteria are tied to specific attributes. So I would really encourage everybody to take time to really review not just the broad 11 criteria, but the attributes that nest under there, to consider how you can really show evidence of those attributes of effective or highly effective when you're completing your application. Consider making those connections explicit in that first section or that first element of your submission that's 25 pages. So just to illustrate, when you begin to look at the rubric, you're going to see that criteria 7 looks at the clinical experience. And so, for example, you might say that you have a robust clinical experience because it has a certain number of hours for the students that are in your program. You can strengthen your application when you start to hit on multiple indicators or multiple attributes of that criteria. So, for example, if you are able to show evidence of a wide range of opportunities to lead, facilitate, and make decisions typical of those made by educational leaders, you're hitting on another one of the attributes. And you'd hit on another attribute if you can then go farther and show evidence of actual and planned purposeful supervision practices that provide formative feedback and ongoing formative or formal assessment of development. So you really want to look carefully at the criteria and the attributes or indicators that nest under there to think about how you can showcase key elements of those criteria in that first 25 pages. Then lastly, I would want to draw your attention to 2 areas that have been weaker areas in the submission. Again, when you look back at the criteria, and there are 11, 2 criteria in particular, criteria 5 and 6, have tended to be ones that have been less well evidenced or featured in application materials that have come forward. Criteria 5 asks for evidence that the preparation program is conceptually coherent and clearly aligned with quality leadership standards. and that it's informed by current research and scholarship on the essential problems of schooling, leadership, and administration. It also asks for evidence to demonstrate that the preparation program is based on strong principles of adult learning. So for example, really thinking about how the academic program has been redesigned around a logic that shows how a set of courses connect and build back to to show that conceptual coherence would be an area that could really strengthen applications, and hasn't been an area that's been really elaborated in some applications. The second criteria where deeper attention could benefit or strengthen an application would be criteria number 6, evidence that the preparation program engages in ongoing programmatic evaluation and enhancement. Any thing that you can do to reveal data that you're collecting in an ongoing manner that help you to learn about strengths and weaknesses of the program, and then how the program is using those data for continuous improvement and program evaluation will strengthen your application. Anne?
Thanks, Shelby. It's Shelby and I served as reviewers together 1 year, and just to follow on with some of the points that she has made, as reviewers, as we're reading through the written responses, we're really looking for the relationships that we're seeing in those descriptions with the program and instructional quality criteria. We're looking for programs that go beyond describing what their program offers to add in evidence of what their program offers, and then whenever possible, support that evidence with actual impact. So as an example, each of the programs will be providing in criterion 8, you provide a description of your recruitment and selection process. And you should offer evidence of the process. So if you look at the rubric, it talks about having a selection process, recruitment and selection plan that's actually written, showing evidence that your plan is being followed, showing how that your institution's recruitment and admissions practices are actually building on what your host institution is doing. So all of those pieces are really important, and most programs include that information, those descriptors of what it is that they have in place. But the programs that really stand out are those that go beyond that and also demonstrate through data what has been the outcome of their recruitment and selection process. So did they set about to increase diversity within their program? And if so, how have they shown over time that their cohorts have become more diverse? Or as a program, as part of their coherence in producing quality leaders with certain aspects of leadership, are you able to show that the people that you selected for your program are people who are focused instructionally before they enter the program? You know, what evidence do you have of that? And then what are the outcomes that has resulted in over time as your candidates are finishing the program? So as a reviewer, it's helpful too when programs embed links to evidence-based support. Sometimes you're unable to put everything in the paragraph. And it may be helpful just to have a link to another part of the application that says, and here we're putting in our more of a table of what some of these outcomes have been. So think about, for each of the criterion area, consider what evidence you have to support a rating of very effective, or developing. And it's perfectly fine to have a couple of areas that you still see as developing, but I think it's a good piece to, even in the application, own that that's something that you recognize that you're working on. And then how can you communicate further evidence of outcomes? So another example that Shelby gave above was regarding the conceptual coherence of the program. So again, if you think about the conceptual coherence of your program, what other evidence can you provide that the program has conceptual coherence, and then even more important to that coherence has had an impact on your graduates' learning outcomes and their practices in the field. So it's really a way to take the application process and wrap it up from, you know, what you have, why do you have it? What evidence do you have to support that it's there? And then what evidence do you have that it's working and making an impact in terms of outcomes?
Thanks, Anne. When I think about the feedback that we've gotten from programs over the years that we have done this, they have said things like that 25 pages just doesn't seem like enough room to be able to cover all of the 11 criteria. And we definitely understand how difficult it is to really be able to comprehensively provide an overview of all of the really fantastic things that that you do within your programs within 25 pages. But we also have been trying to struggle with how to make the review process doable, because the first year when we didn't we weren't quite as specific about a page limit. We had just the amount of materials for reviewers to go through was almost impossible to do well. So we've really tried to figure out a kind of a middle ground, if you will, and Anne's suggestion of having links within the 25-page overview document is one of those ways, so that if there are specific things that you want to point to that that the 25 pages doesn't allow you to get to, then you can provide a URL within your document that that lets the reviewer know that for additional information that they can go here for that. Also, one of the things that Shelby pointed out is how to make your submission a bit more readable and easy to navigate. So being explicit about the criteria attributes, also organizing the document around those criteria attributes, and signaling to the reviewers when you're talking about specific things can be very, very helpful. Really terrific advice. Thanks so much. So in the next slide, we are going to talk a little bit about the materials that, that you would be submitting as part of the application. And there are 5 parts to it, and there's actually 6, because there is also a sheet that you submit. There's a sheet, a cover sheet that you would submit ahead of time, or as part of the evaluation. But in addition to the cover sheet, which just basically provides information on the name of your program, the department and or school or college of education in which it is housed, and key contact people. Part 1 is the program description. So within the program description, as Anne and Shelby were suggesting, you would want to talk about your program in relation to the award criteria. Be certain that you're not giving short shrift to criteria 5 and 6, as Shelby was suggesting, and then also to really think about the type of evidence that you can speak to that demonstrate that your program does meet the other, all of the 11 criteria. In addition to that 25-page overview of your program, you also have a part 2, which is your course content, where you provide syllabi for the core courses within the program. Part 3, which is focused on fieldwork, where you submit things like a fieldwork guide, which describes fieldwork requirements, documentation, how you document it, and any assessments that you use for candidates. Part 4 is the program effectiveness. This is where you would provide all the evidence of the impact of your program. You can pull this evidence from a variety of different resources, including any graduate surveys that you might do. You might potentially be using the Inspire survey evaluation suite. That would suffice. Also summary of NCATE and TEAC or CAPE evaluations or state evaluations as well. And there might be other evidence that you want to point to, such as things that you do within your program, a variety of different performance assessments and so forth. And then the next part is your faculty vita. And this kind of gets back to one of the criteria around faculty quality. And this would be for each one of the faculty members, both those who are on our tenure line as well as clinical faculty who participate in the delivery of your program. And as we mentioned before, all of this is outlined on the UCEA website. So if you were to go to the website, ucea.org, and you click on opportunities, and then under opportunities, you'll go to the awards page and select the Exemplary Educational Leadership Preparation Award. In the middle of that page, you'll see each one of these steps that are outlined in terms of the application itself, as well as some suggestions for you to get started. So we suggest that that you don't just start writing the application, but that you actually conduct a self-assessment ahead of time using the UCEA Institutional Program Quality Criteria. And then you begin to fill in your cover sheet, and you'll be invited also to, once you submit a letter of intent, you'll be invited to a Dropbox, and that's where you'll put all of your materials. So there are a couple of deadlines that you might be wondering about. And there are two really important ones. May 2nd, 2016 is the deadline for submitting a letter of intent. And essentially the letter of intent needs to say something like, our program intends to submit an application. It doesn't have to be anything more than that. And what will happen as a result of that is we will set up a Dropbox for you and invite you to it, where you would put all of your materials. Then in addition to that, we would then also have a sense of how many programs that our reviewers will be reviewing, so that we can have make sure that the review committee is of ample size. Then the next deadline is the June 30th, 2016, and this is the date that all of your materials need to be in the Dropbox, ready for submission. We won't mess around with any of your materials before then. So, you know, if you're adding piece by piece, that's totally fine. After June 30th, at that point, you're not supposed to make any additional changes, and then the reviewers will have access to all of your materials and start thinking through these things. We did have a question from Emily Donaldson that I wanted to share with you, Shelby and Anne. And she asks, would you suggest organizing part 1 of the application, the 25 pages, by the 11 program quality criteria? Or can applicants follow the 11 tell us about your program questions, etc., as long as the criteria are referenced? And she's referring to in the on the UCEA page, we list tell us about your program, which are questions that align to the quality criteria. So what do you think?
So this is Shelby. I'll go ahead and take a stab at it. I don't think that it matters explicitly whether you subhead down through each one of the program criteria or through the set of questions. If that doesn't feel fluid and appropriate for telling your story, what becomes most important though is that the reader literally be able to find attention to those 11 criteria and see evidence that the program is developed or well developed across those 11 criteria in the first 25 pages. So, for example, if you were to complete the first 25 pages and be able to use a highlighter to say, can we as the program thinking about submitting this application easily track where we talk about each one of these 11 areas and bring to bear some evidence? As long as you as a program can do that, we as the readers would be able to do that. That would be my perspective.
Yeah, this is Anne, and I'd add that I think sometimes just explicitly labeling, if you have like recruitment selection as one of the examples we've already used, that's regardless of where you decide that whether you're following the questions or following the criteria where that goes in, even labeling within it, here's the evidence that we have about our recruitment selection, here's some outcomes. Even if you were to kind of label those within it, then it makes it more explicit for the reviewers to see, okay, here's recruitment selection, here's our evidence, here's our outcomes.
Okay, so really using your formatting to signal the content that you're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yes.
So Emily's question was kind of a perfect segue into talking about tips for preparing your materials. So we've already talked a little bit about some of the tips and ideas that you all had about formatting and things to highlight and so forth. But I was wondering if you have any other tips that you feel like the programs that are interested in nominating might benefit from. Shelby, any other thoughts?
Yeah, so I'll go ahead. This is Shelby. So to begin with, I would encourage everybody to at first assemble a small team, and I think Anne will talk a little bit about that small team in just a couple of minutes. But the work of pulling together an application isn't something that I think is done well by an individual person. So having a team really helps to think about how to do this and do it well. And I would believe that many programs already have lots of material about their programs that help them to think about these criteria. So begin also by pulling together the kinds of material that you already have available to you that might be useful in helping you to tell your story. Second, I think it's really important to take the program self-assessment seriously and to really have several people sit down with that rubric and think out loud about the areas across the criteria that have received improvement attention more recently, and really consider the kinds of evidence and documentation that will allow that story of the improvement attention to be really well revealed. Now, having said the first and second point, the third point that I would make is a caution. Do not automatically use existing text to bring into the application unless the existing text or documents speaks directly to the criteria. And what I mean by that is there have been occasions where I think because materials were readily accessible, they were brought into the application, but reviewers may not be able to quickly understand the rationale for certain documents, and the documents may not be really well revealing of the criteria in the rubric. So start with those documents that you have in front of you, but then think about which ones really are well aligned and that show, reveal, or evidence indicators and criteria. And when they don't show or reveal, think about how you can create a document drawing on some of the material in the existing documents that speaks more directly to the things that are going to be evaluated. I would also encourage people to think about, as you look at the 5 elements that are submitted, and we've talked briefly about element number 1, which is the 25-page description. There are ways that you can make not only the links, as was discussed previously, but application has sections 2, 3, 4, and 5, and there are ways that you can talk briefly about something in section number 1, which is a summary, and then you can add a parentheses to say, and this is revealed in more detail in section number 2 or section number 4, page number 17, for example. So when you can help the reader see how something that is talked about in the first segment is even more deeply illustrated in section 2, 3, 4, or 5, making that connection for the reader is always advantageous.
Thanks, Shelby.
And the very last thing I would say is always think about less is more. And this goes back to a comment that Michelle made earlier, that if the readers have millions of pages to review, it sometimes is hard to find the really important evidence that you're trying to share. So there are occasions where several snapshots versus 15 are always a better way to represent something.
Terrific. Thanks, Shelby. Anne, did you have anything you would like to add in terms of tips?
I sure do. So one of the pieces that Shelby has emphasized and both of us have connected with is the idea of the self-assessment. And Shelby had suggested that you convene a small group of people. If you look through the UCEA institutional program quality criteria, you'll notice that criterion 3 is evidence that the program makes use of an advisory board of educational leadership stakeholders and involves leadership practitioners in program planning, teaching, and field internships. Your advisory board and your stakeholders from your school districts are really excellent people to consider adding to your that self-assessment team, and even possibly not with the writing team itself, but to engage with your stakeholders for that self-assessment, because then you actually are demonstrating through the writing of this award application that you're actually addressing some of the criterion that's in the award application. And I think that also just gives you an opportunity to really hear in a focused way from the people who are your stakeholders, and also from your advisory board members about what suggestions do they have, where do they see the strengths of the program. I think that could be very, very helpful for you as a program as you're going forward with the self-assessment. Another piece that Shelby mentioned is it's I think very advantageous to identify with your stakeholders and a small team of people on how your criteria do interrelate. So for instance, if you have decided that your program is about preparing, and I'm going to use the example of preparing turnaround leaders, or about preparing people who work in strongly diverse schools, then how is it that everything else in the application can feed to that? Like, does your conceptual framework reflect that you are working in curriculum areas around turnaround? Is your recruitment selection connected to turnaround? So how are you interrelating the different aspects of these criteria so they're not seen as separate, but that they're actually seen as interrelated parts? And so, also thinking while you're doing that, as you're working with your advisory board members or your stakeholders in that small group doing the self-assessment, how are you already having them contribute to the curriculum alignment? What evidence do you have to support that the program's impact on impacting learning outcomes? So really thinking about, again, this idea of what do you have, why do you have it, what evidence do you have to show that it's in place, and what evidence do you have to show that it's working? So really keeping those going on through. Some of the weaker submissions do not make links between the criteria, and they don't, often offer evidence on outcomes. Something else I want to mention, because I think it may be an important support, is that there is a special issue of the Journal of Research on Leadership Education entitled Exemplary Leadership Preparation Programs, UCEA Award Winners, and I've put it into the chat box, so you should be able to see some information on that. Last year's award, excuse me, not last year's, but the year before award winners are actually, they have information about their programs in that article. Shelby mentioned earlier having the opportunity to write and submit that article. So that may be another piece of support for you and for the people that you're working with in your small self-assessment team, is to take a look at what were some of the aspects that were really highlighted in earlier award winners, and get a sense of what their programs are like.
Thanks, Anne. That's really helpful. We did have one question, or a couple questions from Nicole Limperopoulos. I think I've said that correctly. who asks if the course syllabi and field guides are set up as websites. Can the program share the links with the review team, or is it preferred that they are converted to Word documents? Any preference there?
I don't have a preference, but go ahead, Anne.
Yeah, I would say as long as you can make sure that the links are working, it's, you know, there's a place in there where it says, for instance, that CVs need to be uploaded, so that's, you know, and course syllabi need to be uploaded. But I think having the links embedded within is another approach that you can use.
Okay, super. All right. So the next question that that we wanted to talk about was, I believe, anyway, we are on discussion and questions for listeners, but yeah, okay. So I don't see any additional questions from listeners. Well, we did have one more question from Nicole. And Nicole was wondering about the deadlines for when the awards would actually be announced. So after you submit your letter of intent and then you submit your materials by the end of June, the committee will be working in July and August to work their way through all of the materials, and then typically what happens at that point is that they identify the top 5 out of all of the programs. Sometimes it's more than 5, sometimes it's less. And then dig deeply into the different rankings of those programs. Generally, we don't have a decision until the beginning of September. And we look to make an announcement by mid-September. After that, after we make the announcement, then the programs are invited to participate in a UCEA Awards Luncheon, which occurs at the UCEA Annual Convention. This year, that is occurring in November, and it's in Detroit. And we hope that you all will come, whether your program is recognized or not, and help us celebrate those that are. Are there any additional questions from the audience that you'd like to either put in the chat box or into the question box? I'd invite you to do that now. And while you're doing that, I just wanted to see whether or not there are any other thoughts that Shelby and Anne have that have emerged while we've been talking today that you think would be helpful to share with folks.
I'd just like to say that one of the pieces that I thought was really helpful for me as a program director was serving as a reviewer. And I don't know at what point in time UCA may be looking for the next set of people to review. If you're submitting an application, of course you would not serve as a reviewer at this time, but to consider having that as part of your service, because you have the opportunity to read through the submissions of other programs and really learn quite a bit from our colleagues in the field about what it is that they're doing. I find that work has been very supportive for me as a program director to consider areas that our program could be further augmented and really serve our students and eventually the P12 students even better.
And I would just like to congratulate the programs that are online today. They're online because they've done lots of work to strengthen the programs and make such contributions and the submissions possible. This is really hard work, and so way to go, everyone.
Yep, absolutely. It's actually really exciting every year when we get the nominations because it's really helpful to see so much really high quality work going on within the university preparation programs. And it's also, I think, a really significant learning experience for the folks who serve on the review team, even though we select them because they have a certain level of expertise in this area already. I know that I've spoken to just about every single one of them about what a really valuable experience they've found it to be. It's similar to the UCEA membership review process, where when you're visiting these different programs or you're reviewing their materials, you find some really impressive and exciting and innovative ideas for teaching and for evaluating candidates and for providing them with opportunities to have really significant, powerful learning experiences in the field. So if you also have an interest in thinking about how to get involved in either one of those activities, you can contact UCEA headquarters about that as well. There are a couple of people who raised their hands during the webinar, and unfortunately, because you didn't submit a question, we're not going to be able to address what concerns you might have, and I apologize for that in advance. However, if you would like to send any questions after the fact, we'll make sure that we get them answered for you right away. I believe we've reached the end of today's webinar, and just want to thank all of you for joining us today, and thank Shelby and Anne for your significant contributions. I always value having an opportunity to talk with folks like Shelby and Anne, who are contributing their time and their expertise for the benefit of the field. So thanks so much for being here today. And I'd also like to thank those of you who asked some questions and then sent us little remarks in the text box, thanking us for the contributions. We've certainly found this to be a really important award program, and we're really happy to know that there are so many people who are interested in participating. If you have folks who wanted to participate in today's webinar and weren't able to, we are recording this, and so it'll be available online. Should you get bored and want to listen to it again, it's there for you. Anyway, we hope you all have a really pleasant week, and we look forward to receiving your submissions. Take care now. Bye-bye.